Thank you for the distinguished guests, panelists, attendees, and all the esteemed people from industry who have joined us today in this session. I think Richard and set the context in terms of what we should be looking up in terms of the market in the Philippines, especially given the timing that Krishnan spoke about earlier, that we are perfectly timed in terms of what opportunities lie in front of us. And today I am tasked with, talking about a few trends which we need to watch out for, which are the undercurrents of how this market is going to shape up and the opportunities that are going to come to us, right? Number one, which was mentioned earlier, is on financial inclusion. Very interesting topic, and I will throw some light in this topic in terms of what it means for the banking industry, what it means for the fintech players, and where are the opportunities to contribute from our side for the development of the industry. The second and the most important, which is obviously offshoot of the opportunities arriving from financial inclusion, and that is on fintech companies and the areas that they can start contributing in terms of their investments, in terms of the products, in terms of services that they need to contribute. Also, from a big bank perspective, because traditionally EY and SGV work a lot with the traditional big banks, which means transformation is a big agenda in those banks, and we continuously support it. Transformation is often misunderstood and sometimes can be frustrating, but I'll throw some light on the research that has happened by or conducted by EY with the top 10 global banks who are actually benchmarking on how some of these transformations should be done and where the focus needs to lie. Finally, most importantly, what does it mean for a sustainable economy in the Philippines? And I think the financial sector is the most well-positioned in terms of, leading us to a carbon-neutral economy. Sorry for the mic. So, coming back to financial inclusion, this is presenting a significant opportunity for us in the Philippines. Now, if I go back to a study done by BSP in 2019, there were 7 out of 10 Filipinos who were excluded, meaning they did not have a transaction account. The situation has changed lately, but what it signals is there's a huge untapped market that fintech companies have an opportunity to address. Now, how can these opportunities be addressed? The number one area to my mind is about reducing disparities, right? So how do we cover the unbanked population? How do we cover the marginalized people? And how do we reach to or expand our coverage to areas where we have traditionally not been there? Because it's been lucrative to work in highly economic areas, but active areas, but some of the areas are still neglected. The other is on financial resilience, right? So how do we provide affordable and tailored offerings, niche experiences which are actually addressing some of the segments and sectors which are currently not being catered to, and workers who are actually not included in those systems. Thirdly, we should look at how to, fuel the engine of the economy, which is the MSME sector and agriculture and startup sector. A bulk of activity is happening in that sector, and it makes sense to offer products which meet those requirements of the sector. Finally, empowering customers, which is about increasing the participation, making sure that the loan coverage is to a wider population and it is customized to the requirements, and providing insightful data-driven growth. BSP actually has 4 core themes on which it is looking at financial inclusion. The number one is on promoting digital finance. Number two is actually creating a financial ecosystem where we have a large role to play. Number three is on educating consumers. And finally, it is all about cybersecurity and trust, making sure that the banking system is reliable and customers would like to bank with us, right? How do we as business leaders respond to this opportunity? I think we have an opportunity to innovate on the fintech products and services which are accessible, which are affordable, and relevant to the financially excluded population. There's an opportunity to collaborate with financial institutions, government bodies, policymakers, stakeholders to promote financial inclusion and create an environment which enables fintech companies to thrive. Now there's some interesting turn of events since 2019 to 2021. If we look at the BSP recent research, what we have seen is the percentage of Filipinos who are now having a bank account has actually increased from 29% to about 56% in 2021. This is about 22 million Filipinos that have opened a bank account during this time, and it is more than doubled. And the percentage of Filipinos with e-money accounts is close to about 36%, which has almost quadrupled from 8% in 2019, right? So these are very encouraging signs that the consumer is ready. Are we ready to provide the right offerings for the consumers? However, there's still some way to go, because if I look at the farming sector, the agri sector, there are still close to about 73% of the population which is financially excluded, and we need to include them as well. There's almost half of the non-working adult population still do not have a bank account, which is about 15 million Filipinos which are still excluded, right? So another interesting statistics is the informal credit actually rose from 2019 to 2021, right? But the formal credit remained exactly where it was, which means there's a huge unaddressed market where people are borrowing at a higher interest rate because of unavailability of credit to them, right? So we need to kind of look at what innovative solutions we can bring in and make it available to the last mile for people to use, right? Now, EY and SGV, in collaboration with the policy forming bodies and funding agencies, is actually working on financial exclusion with rural banks. And the goal is here to bridge the last mile unbanked population and to build institutional capacity, right? And this includes, whole set of systems, technologies that we can bring in, like core banking solutions, transition to cloud, banking interface for end consumers. And SGV is also working on, models where we can provide a sandbox environment for fintech companies, as well as, a concept which is called bank in the box. And this is relevant to smaller players who may not be able to make such big investments to go high tech. So given the opportunities, I think if I look at the fintech landscape in the Philippines, there's been a huge evolution, especially driven by increasing adoption of smartphones and internet connectivity. I've seen the recent report on the Philippines on internet connectivity, which is being rising by the year, which means more and more consumers have access to technology right in their palm, right? So besides, the policymakers have been very open, they have been very encouraging, and they are working very hard to promote financial inclusion. Did you know that things like connectivity or even a space program could be linked to how the financial inclusion happens. Because at the end of the day, we are talking about ability to map agricultural land, make our farmers more savvy, earn more money. We're also talking about bringing connectivity to far-flung areas, right? So a lot of these initiatives which we see might be in a different domain is actually going to fuel the financial inclusion and the financial space. Right. So if I look at digital payments, and it is no surprise that digital payments has actually gained the most popularity in the Philippines, right? We saw that adoption has quadrupled in this area. It is also not a surprise that almost a quarter of the startups in globally are actually into the digital payment space, right? And this is one of the areas where the impact to customers are absolutely direct, and customers really appreciate the convenience of not having to be, not requiring to be present in a physical bank to do a transaction, right? So fintech companies are actually developing quite interesting payment solutions. I know that the BSP has currently frozen on the licenses on the digital banks. That's a much more sandbox environment to see how the digital banks are progressing. But it clearly holds a huge promise in terms of the rate at which these companies are acquiring customers. Digital lending is another big piece. So the Philippines has a large unbanked population, and one of the areas where lending struggles is because people do not have a credit history, and there are issues with social media profiles, etc., which cannot be accessed for individuals to know whether they have the payment capacity or not. The national ID system is changing that, and the future looks bright. Also, what's going to happen is there are a lot of interesting, what you call, products which are going to get developed, which can work on things like national ID, social profiles, and skill can encourage lending to the unbanked populations. Remittance is another area which is I think Philippines is one of the second largest or probably the largest remitting country. So this is one area where fintech companies have a lot of opportunities, especially cross-border payments. And we have recently seen some linkages across the globe, especially with Singapore Pay Now and UPI interconnecting for allowing seamless cross-border remittances. So similarly, in Philippines, there are opportunities. There's also sandbox environment right now for crypto wallets and crypto trading, which is being tested to see how it is going to perform for the banking sector. Investment and wealth management, as more and more middle class grows, there are aspirations for growing their wealth. And this is one area where there's an open space for offering investment platforms to allow Filipinos to invest in stocks, bonds, and other financial products. On insurance, we continue to be one of the largely unpenetrated markets. It's close to about 15 to 20% of the population that actually has some kind of insurance, and that's a market which needs to be tapped as well. Finally, if I look at the entire space and the number of players that will get added into fintech, into the financial industry, I think it does pose certain issues. The one big issue that I guess a lot of you might be grappling here is on fraud risk and occurring is so high that if it is not managed intelligently, then will lead to fraud and other issues. So we need to be cautious about as we grow, as we go digital, what does it mean to the risks that's getting created? So more actors means more risk. Hence, one of the areas that I work with Ian and we are trying to work with banks is on operational resilience and technology resilience, which is a very important topic. And what happens tomorrow if, someone does as simple as pulling a plug and the system goes down, right? Will the bank stop, right? Of course, that's a very elementary example, but there are consequences to building the entire ecostructure, and that has to be managed as well. Coming to the next topic, which is on digital transformation. So EY works with some of the big banks globally, and this is about 10 banks which work in different markets, and they face different competition in those regional markets. And we did a review with the CEO. It's much more a qualitative research that has happened. And what comes out from that is, most of the CEOs mentioned that almost 38% of the transformation is actually underperforming, right? Which is good and bad both, which means there are a lot of transformations which are not giving results as per desire, and it's an issue. And more or less 67% of the CEOs have faced one or more failed transactions in the last 5 years. So that's another area to look at. So transformation has been challenging. 41% feels it's challenging to execute for a number of reasons, and we'll talk about it. And most of them feel that the ability to transform is the only reason thing that can make them successful in the future. And it's absolutely necessary. They cannot pass it. I think from the research, it's very clear that transformation means bold. It means fundamental change. But often when we are doing transformation, we are looking at, streamlining product, streamlining certain platforms, workflows, etc. But it's more than that, right? Obviously, all of these things are important, but what we need to take care is we need to put the customers in the front when we are transforming. So we have to transform products and services, so it has to be customer approach driven. And that's where we need to repurpose our transformation rather than just looking at, process view. Also, if I look at it, small scale transformations are necessary. They are necessary to make sure that the system overall is functioning. And it needs to be combined with the overall big picture of customer-driven change and customer offerings, right? Very important to keep in mind that a lot of these transformations actually has to be driven from the top. And actually, the findings tell us that about 41% of employees actually understood what the transformation meant. And so there is a lot of work that requires to be done for ensuring that employees understand the vision of why the transformation is being undertaken in the first place, right? So agreement and alignment in the top is important. Ensuring key KPIs is very critical. And rethinking the entire ideation process is also very important, because employees are in a great stage to contribute, and we must make sure that we not only look at each employee starting to look, giving contributions on the ideas, but there has to be an external view coming into the organization as well. So are we capturing the external trends, right? Meeting the industry folks and figuring out what does it mean in terms of transformation. So some of these areas are critical. Another big area which came out that 41% of executives said that they did not have enough funding for transformation. So which means that we have to make the right investments. It's probably because the transformation is spread over a lot of initiatives, and therefore the amount investable for on people, on initiatives, on rewards are missing. So these are some of the areas where I think transformation becomes very critical. Finally, I will come to the last stage of the opportunity, which is about sustainable finance. Now, we are all aware that Philippines listed companies are obligated to, submit the annual sustainability report, right? And BSP has issued circulars providing frameworks for sustainability and guidelines on how to measure sustainability performance. Banks also need to review the loan portfolio. So greater and greater scrutiny is coming from an environmental perspective. So there is a need for sophisticated risk models. There is a growing demand for green finance products. And decarbonization and decarbonization strategy is something which every board is wanting to have a view on. But there are issues. The issues are around how do we look at data, how do we measure, and how do we set goals. And as SGV, we are actually working with the boards for sustainability reporting. We are actually helping companies with sustainable finance roadmaps, low carbon economy, and some of the areas where green finance is becoming critical and regulation is getting more and more strict on where the funding is happening, which industry. To conclude, I think we are seeing a tectonic change in the landscape in the Philippines, which is providing us tremendous opportunities. It is up to us how we are going to leverage it. I think Philippines is at a cusp of big change. The regulators are extremely progressive. In fact, I find the discussions that the regulators have on some of the ideas on how to make Philippines a first world country are very, very interesting. It's up to us how do we work with them closely and leverage and take Philippines to the next level. So with that, I conclude. Thank you, Richard.